So our next two speakers are going to be sharing some mind-boggling statistics with you from a new report from the McKinsey Global Institute. The report is called The Power of Global Gender Parity. Here to talk to us about the structural changes needed for women's empowerment are Sandrine Devillard, the director of McKinsey Company in France, and Madgavkar, the senior fellow from the McKinsey Global Institute based in Mumbai. So if you could please come to the stage. And before we start, we're going to watch a short movie on the power of parity. So please direct your views above. Thank you.
Imagine a world in which women participate in the global economy on the same basis as men.
What impact would this have on our economies and societies?
Today, women make up half of the world's population,
but only contribute 37% to global GDP.
They do not have equal rights, opportunities,
representations or contributions in the economy and society.
Fixing this could potentially add at least $12 trillion to the global GDP in a decade.
And this applies to every economy, advanced or developing.
To deliver the economic potential of women requires tackling inequality in society.
We can't achieve one without the other.
For example, violence against women is a barrier to their participation in the economy.
as is unequal access to education in certain parts of the world.
Another barrier is unequal access to financial services.
Technology or digital connectivity.
Addressing these social disparities is critical to closing the gender gap in the economy
and helping women realize their full potential.
Where? How?
The McKinsey Global Institute has identified 4 categories of inequality around the world
and looked at how each country scores on its gender parity indicator.
We have identified the regions where these gaps are the highest.
So now we know where to prioritize action.
On what type of issues and where in the world.
Actually, there are 10 priorities to address in order to close the gender gap.
5 at the global level and 5 in specific regions.
Focusing on these 10 areas will change the game for 75% of the women affected by gender inequality around the world.
We can bridge the gap
by providing financial support, bringing technology to women who can't access it,
creating economic opportunities for women,
building their capabilities,
changing attitudes in society, in families and at work,
changing laws, policies, and regulations.
Closing the gap is good for the economy and society.
And it's good for business.
This is not just the domain of governments and NGOs.
Businesses can and should help.
By lending voice, capital, expertise.
By driving change.
Both within their organizations
and in the society in which we live.
All stakeholders.
Men.
And women.
Public.
Social.
And private sector.
Need to come together
to make change happen.
Only then can we drive broader social change
that makes the world more equal
and unlocks the economic value of women.
Thank you. Imagine a world in which women contribute to the global economy to the same extent as men. 20 years ago, global leaders met in Beijing with the UN to set the rights for women. And last September, at the UN in New York, they've decided to take stock on the progress and to define a new set of goals. For the first time in history, gender equality, not gender diversity, gender equality has been defined as a goal. We at McKinsey felt that there was no better moment to map the gender inequality throughout the world. This year, we clearly demonstrated that closing the gender equality gap is the highest growth opportunity of the next decade.
So McKinsey Global Institute undertook a very broad and comprehensive assessment of gender equality and gender gaps around the world. Our study covered 95 countries that represent more than 90% of global GDP and 90% of the world's women. We mapped global gender equality based on 15 indicators that were grouped into these 4 categories. The first of them pertains to gender equality in work, and the other 3 pertain to gender equality in society. So this covers important things like access to essential services that enable women to tap economic opportunities, such as healthcare, education, financial and digital inclusion. We also looked at legal protection and political voice, and finally, the ability of women to have physical security and safety from bodily harm. We found that across all these indicators, large gaps do persist. In 40 out of the 95 countries that we studied, we actually found that these countries faced high or extremely high gender inequality in more than half the indicators that we studied. So these are persistent issues.
So we measured 5 indicators of work equality, and we found extremely high inequalities in work on those 5 dimensions. For example, women perform 3 times more unpaid care work than men. This explains why women participation to the total GDP is only at 37%.
Many countries have been successful in closing or narrowing gender gaps on essential services, but large gaps do persist. Some 240,000 women die every year due to pregnancy complications, and this is because they lack access to maternal health care.
Women's participation in the political world is extremely low. Even in democracies and in countries where there is no educational gap, such as the United States or the United Kingdom, women participation to ministries and to parliament is respectively only 24% and 34%. Many countries have also extremely high inequality in legal protection. We are talking about laws in terms of inheritance or laws to protect individuals against violence.
Unfortunately, physical security and autonomy continues to be a persistent challenge in many parts of the world. 1 in 3 women worldwide, for example, face intimate partner violence. And even the most advanced economies haven't been able to really address this issue. We found that across these indicators, advancing gender equality is an important moral and humanitarian goal, but it's also very critical in trying to capture the full economic potential of women.
So, how does our world look like in terms of inequality? We looked at our indicators and we defined a GPS. The GPS measures the inequality level in each country in all of our 15 indicators. As you can see, there are still huge inequalities throughout all our regions. No region is green. That would tell gender equality. Our GPS ranges from 0.44 in South Asia, all the way up to 0.74 in North America and Oceania, which is the best performing region in the world. So, how does our world look like in more detail? What you see in this colorful map are the 15 indicators in column. And each line represents one region. The color is pretty red, orange, and yellow. Green means that on the particular indicator, this region is almost at gender parity. If you look at the bottom of the chart, where you have North America and Western Europe, this is where you have the highest number of green cells. Still, you can see a lot of orange and yellow and red cells. in particular in the field of equality at work. Then we ask ourselves the question, is there a link between gender diversity at work and gender equality at work and gender parity in society? What you have here on the horizontal axis is gender equality in society. What you have in the vertical axis is gender equality in work. Each dot represents one country. As you can tell, there is no country in the bottom right corner, meaning that you have no countries that enjoy high gender equality at work and low gender equality in society. It means that the two are linked. You cannot get gender equality at work if you do not have gender equality in society.
Advancing gender equality represents a huge, massive actually, potential for global economic growth. Our research suggests that doing so could add up to $12 trillion of global GDP in the year 2025. This is a very big number. This is a number that represents doubling what women would otherwise contribute in terms of global growth over this 10-year period. It represents adding 1 percentage point to global economic growth every year. And this is not even the full potential. This is the potential that we could achieve as a world if every country just matched the fastest improvement rates on gender equality or closing the gender gap that countries within its own region have already achieved in the last 10 years. So this is a very fair and achievable aspiration. It's something that we have evidence for that countries are already doing. It's also a good aspiration for the world because every country and every region in the world has a lot to gain. If you look at this map of the boost in regional GDP, 8 to 16 percentage points for different regions. What this means for less developed countries is that a lot more households will have 2 income earners, and women invest in healthcare and education for their children, so this is good for society. For aging economies, what it means is that shrinking labor forces can actually be arrested, and this is good for growth. So whichever country or region you are, this can be one of the most potent drivers of growth and good for society as well.
So, what are the priorities? Thanks to the heat map, we've identified 10 areas for change, 10 burning platforms that would help address the 75% of women who are impacted by gender inequality. 5 issues are spanning across all the regions. We're talking, for instance, about blocked economic potential, fewer legal rights, political underrepresentation, violence against women. 5 other priorities only apply to certain regions of the world, in particular India, Middle East, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. We're talking about labor force participation, low maternal and reproductive health, unequal education level, digital and financial exclusion, and girl-child vulnerability.
Our study identified 75 different interventions or things that the world can do, and we grouped them according to these buckets. But across these interventions, it's clear that businesses can actually play a very important role. They can start by looking at how to drive gender diversity within their own organizations, by recruiting women, by nurturing talent and enabling them to reach leadership positions. They can also do much more outside their organizations, for example, in their supply chains, by promoting women-owned and women-led businesses, and lend their voice to broader social change. This is good for society, but it's also very good for business.
So, successful interventions can also involve multi-sector coalitions. For instance, tomorrow, with the Women's Forum, a number of institutions from the public and private sector will be meeting for the CEO Champion Private Working Session to discuss how to advance women in economy and in their organization. Accelerated progress towards gender parity cannot be achieved by a single player, nor can it be achieved with a silver bullet. Men, women, NGOs, governments, companies, we all need to come together to make this change happen. This would make the world more equitable, it would create growth and prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandrine and Anu. Just one moment.